Dear conference participants and organizers, thank you for inviting me to join this conference. I regret that I am unable to participate live and respond to your questions in real time. However, I sincerely hope that my presentation will be both relevant and valuable to you. So my name is Neringa Pažūsiene. I am the head of the Public-Private Partnership Competence Center in Lithuania. For the past 15 years, our Competence Center has been supporting the public sectors in preparing and implementing PPP projects. So it is my pleasure to share insights into the development and application of PPP in Lithuania. I would like to begin my presentation by sharing some statistics about PPPs in Lithuania. PPP is not a new concept in our country. The first partnership contract concessions date back to the 19th century. For instance, in 1864, a contract was signed in Vilnius to install gas lighting in 32 streets, making one of the earliest PPP projects. Later, the same engineering infrastructure was adopted to establish the first city's water supply system. Another significant milestone was the second concession contract in 1889, which introduced public trams in Kaunas. Since 1997, Lithuania has signed and financially closed 73 PPP contracts. Currently, 52 PPP contracts are active, with most of them are concessions. Among these, 13 are PFI contracts. In other countries, it's called PPP. And 39 are concessions. The majority of PPPs are implemented at the municipal level, while PFI contracts are predominantly at the central government level. Examples include 4 contracts for constructing and maintaining new police stations, 3 contracts for military campus, and an ongoing competitive dialogue for prisons infrastructure development. By sector, you can see by sector, the most common projects are in sports, leisure, and culture. In the coming years, several large-scale projects are planned, at least large by Lithuanian standards, with a population of about 2.8 million and 2024 state budget of approximately 17 billion euros. These projects are significant investments. Currently, there are 2 new military campus projects being prepared with an investment value exceeding 1.5 billion euros and a total project value of more than 4 billion euros. Additionally, several transport sector projects with an estimated value of 500 million euros are also planned. Particularly ambitious challenge is the expansion of Klaipėda port, with planned investments amounting to approximately 1 billion euros. As this type of large-scale PPP project is a first for us, it will certainly pose substantial challenges. Another unique PPP project is the Lithuanian National Museums initiative to develop infrastructure for exhibit storage and restoration, with planned investments amount more than 80 million euros. And our competence center provides legal, financial, and technical assistance in all these large projects, both in project preparation and in procurement procedures. What challenges are we facing in Lithuania and how are we addressing them? One of the most pressing issues is the funding gap between the budget allocated for infrastructure investments and the actual need. The state has approved ambitious long-term goals for infrastructure development to be achieved by 2030. However, only 18 billion euros can be allocated from the state budget, EU grants and other funds, while the real need calculated by our competence center in 2022 exceeds 62 billion euro. In this slide, green color marks the state planned funds, while the red color indicates how much additional funds are needed. The funding gap exceeds 39 billion euros. I want to know that these amounts do not include some areas of municipal needs and capabilities. For example, they do not cover investments in schools, kindergartens, hospitals, social housing, street lighting, sports infrastructure, and etc. And this, since this estimate prices have increased significantly, we believe the actual funding gap may now be almost twice as large. The most critical funding gap are in sectors tied to the EU green course, like transport, energy, environment, also areas undergoing substantial reforms like health, education, social protection, as well as sectors that have long been underfunded, like public safety, justice, defense, where funding can only come exclusively from the state budget. And as a result, the government has started exploring PPPs more seriously. In Lithuania, as in other Europe countries, PPPs are often seen as a solution for funding gap. However, PPP should not be seen as merely a funding mechanism. Instead, it is an opportunity to innovate, manage assets more efficiently, and prioritize service quality over simple construction. By combining public funds, EU grants, and private investments, we can maximize financial resources while addressing our infrastructure needs. What are some other challenges and how are we attempting to resolve them? Historically, PPP planning in Lithuania was fragmented and lacked long-term vision. Projects were scattered and often unaligned with national strategic goals. For example, previously our competence center only became aware of a PPP project when documentation was submitted to us. And after Parliament, Lithuanian Parliament approved new amendments to the PPP legislation this autumn. PPP is integrated into the state's strategic planning system, and comprehensive PPP pipeline will enable better resource allocation and provide the private sector with insights into planned sectors and activities, fostering more informed investment decisions. A recurring issue in Eastern and Central Europe, including Lithuania, is the prevalence of small-scale PPP projects. Consolidating these projects is difficult due to the constitutional autonomy of municipalities, which resist collaboration. And this has led to overlapping infrastructure, such as sport facilities located just 10 to 15 kilometers apart that struggle to attract enough visitors and remain financially viable. Additionally, managing and overseeing consolidated project is very complex. And while we have introduced regulations to encourage municipalities to plan projects functionally, this remains a challenging area. Another problem is the extensive time required to prepare PPP projects, evaluate and approve them, and complete procurement procedures. To address this, we are simplifying processes by removing unnecessary steps, centralizing certain aspects, and standardizing documentation. Centralizing procurement, particularly for projects prepared by central government institution, is also under consideration. And finally, the digitalization of PPP process holds significant promise. We are considering the use of artificial intelligence to analyze reports and oversee PPP contract implementation. Additionally, implementing digital tools such as Source could enhance management efficiency from the planning phase to the completion of PPP contracts. So these efforts aim to make PPPs more attractive, manageable, and aligned with the Lithuanians' long-term development objectives. When implementing public-private partnership projects in Lithuania, European Union funds are sometimes utilized. This approach was especially common a decade ago. Various models for using EU funds in PPPs have been applied in Lithuania, with the most popular being the direct investment model. In this model, EU funds are used to create infrastructure, and the beneficiaries of this support can be either public or private entities. For instance, municipalities frequently used the EU funds to build infrastructure, which was then transferred to the private concessionaires responsible for operating and maintaining it. And this model was instrumental in construction sport and culture complexes, swimming pools, and etc. In some cases, private partners themselves received EU funds to create infrastructure. However, private partners could only receive up to 50% of the EU funds, while public entities could receive more than 85 or 90% of the total cost. The second model involves using EU funds as payments subsidies to private entities. In this scenario, the private sector finance and constructs infrastructure, and public entities use EU funds to pay for the completed infrastructure. And this model has been successfully applied in street lighting public-private partnership projects in Lithuania. And sorry, and the last, the third model involves financial instruments such as guarantees for banks or compensations for low interest. And this approach is mainly used in energy efficiency projects. However, it is less popular in Lithuania because it lacks the direct subsidies that institutions have grown accustomed to. As Lithuania transitions from being a recipient of EU support to a donor, it's like Latvia, the availability of EU funds has decreased. And consequently, when this model is applied, financing often comes from the state budget than EU funds. While financial instruments are less common, they offer significant potential for supporting sustainable projects that align with Lithuanians' energy and environmental goals. When preparing PPP projects that plan to use EU funds, several challenges arise. One of them, and the main issue, is the lack of competence in both public entities preparing the PPP projects and institutions administering EU funds, many of whom lack an understanding of PPP mechanism. And this results in delays and difficulties in coordinating process and timelines. For example, structural funds have a limited absorption period of about 5-7 years. Meanwhile, the preparation of a PPP project from concept to contract sign can take around 2, 3 or more years. In some contracts we have, in some PPP projects, we have 5 years until the contract was signed. And with contracts themselves spanning 10 to 20 years or more. And this discrepancy complicates planning and implementation PPPs. Another challenge is determining who qualifies as the beneficiary of EU funds, a public entity or a private partner. In Lithuania, most EU funds are allocated to the public sector with strict distribution plans in place. Private partners, on the other hand, must participate in competitive tenders without a guarantee of success. Furthermore, current EU-funded measures for business are largely limited to energy efficiency projects, leaving few opportunities for private partners to secure funding for new infrastructure. And finally, the impact of PPP contracts on the state budget deficit and debt is a significant concern when EU funds are involved. For instance, 10 years ago, during the preparation of one of the large PPP project, National Stadium, 50 million euros of structural funds were earmarked for infrastructure creation. Since according to Eurostat rules, financing of PPP projects with EU funds does not affect the government deficit and debt, it was initially planned that the private partner would be compensated for the creation of the infrastructure within 2 years of its creation, and not throughout the entire period of PPP contracts. However, given that EU funds were not sufficient to compensate for all investments in the creation of the National Stadium, additional financing was provided from the state and municipal budgets under the same conditions, that is within 2 years of the creation of the National Stadium infrastructure. And such a payment mechanism, according to Eurostat rules, means state financing, and the PPP contracts was classified as on-balance sheet, increasing public debt by over 100 million euros. As Lithuania does not have many PPP contracts utilizing EU funds, however, our experience has highlighted several important lessons. Firstly, it is essential to clearly define the process in legal acts, specifying who can submit applications, the role of potential partners, subcontractors, submission timelines, payment terms, and the EU fund transfer mechanism. Such clarity helps avoid confusions and ensures smooth implementation. Secondly, it is beneficial to include a dedicated annex in PPP contracts detailing the responsibility for infrastructure verification, document submission requirements, payment schedules, and procedures for addressing eligibility issues. Thirdly, it is crucial to establish compensation mechanism for cases where incurred costs are deemed ineligible by institution administering EU funds. Since EU funds typically cover only the cost of assets creation, not financing cost, not investment returns, or additional capital expenses, it is necessary to identify alternative funding sources and solutions. By addressing these factors, we can ensure that PPP projects funded by EU resources are both efficient and compliant with regulatory frameworks maximizing the impact on Lithuania's development goals. And in conclusion, improving the PPP environment and making this instrument effective is a continuous effort. Over the last 15 years, the Central Project Management Agency, as Lithuanian Public-Private Partnership Competence Center, has been dedicated to enhancing PPP process and ensuring they benefit all stakeholders. Key priorities, including integrating long-term PPP planning into Lithuanian strategic framework, promoting consistency in practice and streamlining procedures to reduce the duration and the complexity of projects. Long-term PPP plans not only help the state allocated resources efficiently, but also provide private sector partners with clarity on investment opportunity. Effective partnerships depend on mutual cooperation, trust, and clear communication. I hope our ongoing efforts will lead to successful and harmonious collaboration that contribute to countries' development goals. Thank you for your attention and have a great conference.